This is the listening test for Top Tips for IELTS. You'll hear 4 different recordings and you'll have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you'll have a chance to check your work. In the real exam, you'll hear each recording once only. In this practice test, you can play the recordings as many times as you want. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you'll be given 2 minutes to check all of your answers. Part 1. You'll hear a woman telephoning a job agency about temporary summer work. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 7. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 7.
Good afternoon, Harper Holiday Job Agency. How may I help you?
Hi, I'd like to find a job for this summer if possible.
Certainly. Let me take some details and I'll fill in a form on my computer. So, your first name, please.
It's Lily.
Thank you, Lily. And could you give me your surname now, please?
It's Claremont. That's spelt C-L-A-R-E-M-O-N-T.
Is that last letter T for Tango?
Yes.
Okay, I've got that. Now, I'm afraid I need to ask you for your date of birth, please.
No problem. It's 23/4/89.
Oh, right, that's my birthday too. Though I'm a few years older than you. I was born in 85.
Really? It's a good day for a birthday, isn't it? The same day as Shakespeare's too. So, what else do you need to know?
Well, now, we need to move on to talk about the summer job you're after. I need to get some details from you about the kind of work you'd like. Firstly, let's think about dates. June to September, is it? That's what most people want.
I don't want to go on till September. I prefer to finish in August. I'd like a break before term starts again.
Fair enough. Okay, and do you have strong feelings about where you work? London, a smaller town?
Actually, I've always wanted to work in Scotland.
Right, I'll see what we can do. And would you consider doing work abroad?
That would be fantastic. I didn't know you dealt with that sort of opportunity too. I'd like to go for that.
Yes, we do. We have contacts in all sorts of different places.
Great!
Okay, so now, do you have any particular type of work in your sights? I'd like a first and a second priority, please, to help us suggest what might suit you. Ideally, nothing too specific. Just say something like hotel work.
OK. Well, that doesn't appeal much to me, I'm afraid. I guess the thing I'd like most of all would be to work outside. I'd really rather not be stuck indoors all through the summer.
Yes, I know what you mean. And your second priority? Teamwork, perhaps? Lots of people your age prefer that.
Yes, I'll go for that. I was going to say well-paid work, but in fact money probably isn't as important for me as other things.
Right.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 8 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 8 to 10.
now I need to find out a bit more about you and what skills you could bring to a job.
Oh dear. Not a lot, I'm afraid.
I'm sure that's not the case. For example, do you drive?
I'm learning at the moment. With any luck, I'll have my licence by the summer. But I can't bank on it, of course.
Sure. So, what about your knowledge of languages?
I've got a bit of school French and Spanish, but I certainly don't speak them well. In fact, I can hardly do much more than order a meal in a restaurant. People say I'm great on the guitar, but I don't suppose that's likely to be relevant.
Oh, you never know. I'll certainly make a note of it. What about any previous work experience?
Well, when I was at school, I had a Saturday job working in a computer store. I didn't really enjoy it much, as I was never that interested in IT. But I did have lots of contact with customers, of course. And I got quite good at handling complaints, I think.
OK. Any other work experience?
Not paid work. But I did help with after-school swimming clubs when I was younger.
Do you have a certificate as an instructor?
No. But I helped several local primary schools and I really enjoyed it. And the proper coach said I was very good at it.
That's good. OK, that gives us quite a lot of good stuff to go on. Let me have a search through our database and see what we can find. There should be something.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1. Part 2. You'll hear a man giving a talk about a local community centre. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Welcome to the Culport Community Centre. As you know, we are a secondary school during the day. However, we have a range of excellent facilities here, and we believe it's our duty to make them available to the local community at times when they're not in use by our pupils. So I'm very glad to see so many of you here this evening to learn more about our facilities and what we have on offer this year. As last year, our football pitches are available at certain times for local clubs to use. They are, of course, used a great deal by our own pupils at weekends, but there are some occasional Sunday afternoon slots free, as well as a number of evenings. As an experiment this year, we are allowing teams to make bookings for the use of a pitch on the school website. If this works smoothly, then we may extend this to other facilities next year. Now, if you're not already a member of our library, then I would certainly recommend that you should join. We don't just have books there. We also have good collections of DVDs, and you are welcome to use the computers there. We have excellent broadband connections, and you can go online at no extra charge. The library building's just been renovated, and we've been able to build on an extra area at one end, taking over a previous piece of waste ground. So we really are very proud of this facility, and we'd like you to come along and enjoy it too. We have 8 tennis courts available for your use here in the evenings and at weekends. There isn't usually an enormous demand for these, so you can just turn up and use them when you want to. If it eventually becomes sensible to introduce a reservation system, then of course we'll do so. Our large school hall is popular with local drama clubs and has also been extensively used by various clubs and private parties for a range of social events. It can be booked for use just on Saturdays and Sundays. We don't charge for this, but do invite users to make a small voluntary payment to a local charity. This year, the school is giving particular support to sports for the disabled. Finally, our computer lab. As well as the computers in the library, we have a dedicated computer lab with 20 of the latest machines. We normally open this to the public at weekends. However, this term, it's going to be very heavily used outside school hours by pupils who are working on updating the school website. So we won't be opening it up for public use again until next term. Then we plan to run a range of classes in computer skills. Some of our older pupils will be acting as tutors on these courses.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Right. Well, I'd like to finish by telling you about 2 special events that we've got coming up soon. The first one's on October the 14th. It's a table tennis tournament. We had a chess tournament last year and that was extremely successful, so we thought we'd try something similar. But last year's event was only for the under-18s. This year, everyone can enter. There's no age limit, though we will organise matches according to the ages of the participants, of course. There'll be prizes for the winner of each age category. A local shop has donated some books, and we are very grateful for these. If it's a success, we may introduce cups as prizes next year. There will be a small charge both for players and spectators, just £1.50 each. The money will go towards buying new sports equipment for use at future events. The second event will take place in November, starting from the 12th and running until the end of the month. This is a special photography exhibition, where we'll be displaying photos by teenagers. A panel of experts will choose the best in a number of categories and will award prizes in the form of DVDs. Tickets for the exhibition will cost £2, so we hope that as many of you as possible will come along to these events.
That is the end of Part 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers to Part 2. Part 3. You'll hear 2 sports science students, Martin and Julia, talking about a joint presentation they have to do. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Hi, Julia. Have you got time to work on our joint presentation?
Hi, Martin. Yes, I'd like to get on with it too. We need to be clear about who's doing what for a start, how we'll share the work.
Well, last time we met, we pretty much figured out who was going to cover which section as far as background reading goes. But what's going to be tricky is making sure that the presentation comes across as one piece of work.
Exactly. There's a real danger that it'll come across as bitty. We'll have to watch out for that. But we are going to do half and half when it comes to presenting it, aren't we?
Sure. And for the delivery, we've got half an hour.
OK. And as we've chosen to do an introduction to sports science, we only have to focus on key points, don't we?
Yeah, we don't need to go into detail, so we should have enough time. But we've got to bear in mind that we're giving the presentation to students coming to a university open day to find out what sports science is about, not to people who already know a lot.
Yes, and some things will be easier to communicate than others.
Yes, I suppose so. And you know the bit I'm doing on biomechanics? I really want to do a bit more research on that. I've already got loads of stuff on the human body, its flexibility and limitations, but I'd really like to look more into the work that's being done on improvements to rackets and so on, and how much this can impact on performance.
OK. And do you want my notes on the importance of the environment on sports people?
Yes, please.
And I was reading an interesting article last night about the benefits of sports science research for athletes.
You mean science makes their performance more predictable?
More that you can tell if someone is up to the fitness levels and technique to take part in some major event. I don't mean looking at the training programme, more looking at the athletes themselves.
OK, we should include the benefits, definitely. But before that, I think we'd better put in a section on psychology.
Absolutely. In this country, we tend to think that to be a top sports person, you must by nature have a will of iron. But in fact, athletes can quickly lose confidence when they start losing, and conversely, they become too complacent when they're winning. In other countries, people are much more aware than they are here of the value of support from a good sports psychologist.
Yeah, right. Anyway, back to our presentation. What about the conclusion? Shall we go back to the slide showing the aims of the presentation to demonstrate that we've covered all the points?
Well, why not be more positive and end with something inspiring that a famous athlete has said?
OK, good idea.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Shall we just go over the checklist that our tutor gave us to make sure we'll satisfy all the criteria?
Yes, OK. Well, firstly, how are we going to make sure that the audience really gets our key points? Do you think we should give out a summary?
Well, that could mean the actual presentation was a bit ineffective. It'd be better, surely, to get feedback from the listeners by asking them things at various points.
Good idea. We'll write those later. Then, the jargon. Perhaps to deal with that, because there is quite a lot of specialist terminology, we could prepare a glossary that I could give out while you're talking.
Yes, good idea. And to sustain interest and make people feel involved, which is the next point, we could also bring in some quick activities for the audience that'll involve them talking to each other. I could sort those out if you like.
OK. Then, The checklist mentions effective use of technology. I'm not sure that PowerPoint slides with text by itself are clear enough. I had thought of putting some pictures in, but that might just be distracting.
OK. Well, let's prepare slides with just text like we planned. But let's try them out beforehand with a few friends, just to see how they react. Then if they don't work very well, we can always do something different.
Good. Well, that just leaves the last point. We'll need to make sure that we're managing the time well.
Well, surely the best way of doing that is for each of us to keep an eye on our own watch, don't you think?
Yes, you're probably right. There isn't any point in...
That's the end of Part 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers to Part 3. Part 4. You'll hear part of a university lecture about managing a tropical ecosystem in Australia. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
G'day. Today I'm going to talk about the management of a tropical ecosystem in North Queensland. A substantial amount of research has been done in this region into the effects on the environment of events like severe storms. And the kind of landscape that I'm going to focus on here is the rainforest rather than the tropical savanna of this area. I'll be looking at the effects of storms on wildlife and on certain species in particular. So, what happens when an ecosystem is damaged? And which areas are most vulnerable to damage? Typically, the areas that suffer most are where there's farmland on one side and a city on the other. This is because it doesn't have vegetation density or height to protect it from flooding or strong winds. Studies indicate that although some plant species grow back quite quickly after being damaged, others do not. The ones that are growing near rivers find it most difficult to regenerate, so any restoration work needs to focus on these areas. Formerly, it had been believed that upland areas would be most at risk as they might be more exposed. Now, one reason we're able to have accurate information is that various studies took place after the cyclone in northern Australia a couple of years ago. Regarding the effects on wildlife, scientists found that numbers of leaf-eating marsupials remained stable 6 to 8 months after damage to the ecosystem. Interestingly, a species of fox changed its habits after being disturbed. It changed its sleeping habits and formed small camps. And nearly all fruit-eating birds returned to pre-cyclone levels after 7 months. All that is apart from the cassowary bird. Cassowaries are an endangered species of flightless bird. Research shows that after a storm with very high winds, These birds were driven by a lack of food to wander out onto highways. Of the cassowaries that died as a result of the storm, 70% died on highways after being hit by vehicles, and 22% were attacked by dogs as they ventured into towns. On top of that, these birds are quite fragile, so if they're disturbed or dislodged from their natural habitat, as they were in this case, they tend to suffer more from diseases. However, there is a somewhat happier ending to this story. Because the cassowary bird is on the list of endangered species, every effort is being made to conserve it. There is talk of breeding programs being set up, but in the meantime, a group of scientists has been monitoring the movement of the birds and organising the construction of what they call corridors, so that the birds will be able to move safely from one area to another. It's also hoped that they'll be able to discourage the birds from entering towns. So, what of the future? Well, a lot depends on funding. And despite being turned down by a leading university, scientists have now managed to secure a significant sum from a timber company, and they formed themselves into an action group. With the money, they intend to carry out surveys to determine the exact number of cassowaries in existence in Australia. They also need to know how big the genetic pool is, and by analysing the DNA of the cassowary, scientists can identify not only its sex and age, but, more importantly, the family of that bird. This information will then inform management plans. Scientists will manage one area in particular to begin with, and then eventually extend their studies to all of Northern Australia. The first area designated for protection status is on the coast, and it's hoped that within a couple of years, some of the larger nearby islands will also be included in the scheme. Now, I'd like to turn...
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 2 minutes to check all your answers. You have 1 minute left.